Welcome to the North Brooklyn Candidates Forum on Parks and Open Space. Thank you for joining us. My name is Katie Denny Horowitz, and I am the Executive Director of the North Brooklyn Parks Alliance. A few housekeeping items. For one, I wanted to introduce Jorge Berrios, who is our Spanish interpreter for this evening. You don't see him, but he is there, and if you need his services, go to the bottom of your bar and you can see the word interpretation. Click on that and you're able to choose Spanish if that's your preferred language for this evening. Feel free to use our chat to communicate with us. We're also going to be hopping over to Facebook Live. And tonight we welcome a dozen city council candidates competing to become your next leader of the 33rd and 34th districts of Brooklyn. This is all going to happen on June 22nd, which is going to be one of the most influential election days in recent New York City history. We have a new mayor on the table, new comptroller, every borough president in the city, and 2/3 of the city council, including the 2 districts in North Brooklyn. So given this, kind of all heavy stuff, given this last fall, in part considering the impact and the potential of this major transfer of power, but also already sort of understanding and considering the fiscal and social implications of COVID-19 pandemic, 4 organizations came together to approach that major transition with a plan. Those 4 organizations was my organization, North Brooklyn Parks Alliance, as well as the Newtown Creek Alliance, and Willis Elkins and Lisa Bloodgood are here tonight. Masu Moitra from El Puente is also our partner, and of course, Anthony Bucera from North Brooklyn Neighbors. Together, these 4 organizations have combined to become the North Brooklyn Open Space Coalition. And we started organizing and planning for tonight's conversation. And I'm very pleased to share that we received a grant from the NYC Green Fund, which is supporting tonight's conversation. So tonight what we're doing, we're taking a deep dive. We're bringing our candidates with them, all 12 of them, into the very complex nuances of parks and open spaces and the issues we face every day. Specifically, we are looking at these issues through the lens of equity. And I can't think of anyone better who can speak to the significance of equity and environmental justice better than the longtime champion of these great ideals, Francis Lucerna, who is the co-founder of El Puente. I can't imagine anyone on this call who doesn't know Francis. So welcome, Francis. I wanted to invite you to say a few words and introduce our 2 incredibly passionate moderators. So thank you, Francis.
Thank you, Katie, and good evening, everyone. Tonight, I have the pleasure and honor to introduce 2 colleagues who have had the privilege, I have had the privilege, and El Puente has had the privilege to work with for over the years, and who I deeply respect and admire. They are champions and warriors, as we call them, for the cause of equity and justice in our community. We have had great moments of really bringing that to fruition in our community. And I think that is why I think in the 40-year history of El Puente, this moment, the moment that we find ourselves, it is so important to really focus on the issue of equity when it comes to our environment, and particularly the equity of green, clean spaces for our community. So tonight we have this forum, and I am really privileged to introduce the moderators for tonight's forum, Diana Reyna and Ron Shiffman. For over 20 years, Diana Reyna has demonstrated an outstanding commitment to communities across Brooklyn and Queens through government service and advocacy. She was the first Dominican American woman elected to public office in New York City as city councilwoman for the 34th district, proudly representing her communities of Williamsburg and Bushwick. She fought to champion the reopening of McCarran Pool, waterfront open spaces, and the redesign and upgrade of our local parks. Today, she runs her own consulting firm and serves as a board member of the National Dominican Day Parade, Van Allen Institute, Habitat for Humanity NYC, and the Brooklyn Public Library. Welcome, Deanna. Ron Schiffman is a city planner for close to 60 years of experience providing architectural planning, community economic development, and sustainable development assistance to community-based groups in low and moderate income neighborhoods. Ron co-founded the Pratt Institute Center for Community and Environmental Development, which is the oldest university-based community design and development center in the United States. Ron sits on the boards of local, national, and international organizations committed to equitable and sustainable planning and development efforts, and has authored numerous articles on urban planning, sustainable development, environmental and social justice, and community economic development. Among the many recognitions he has received for his contributions to the field of American planning are two prestigious awards: the Rockefeller Foundation's Jane Jacobs Lifetime Achievement Award and the American Planning Association National Planning Pioneer Award. He is presently Professor Emeritus in the Graduate Center for Planning and the Environment at the School of Architecture at Pratt Institute. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Deanna and Ron. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Frances. And I'd like to take a moment to thank the North Brooklyn Open Space Equity Coalition. This has been a lot of hard work, and we are thrilled to be able to coalesce in this way, to be able to ensure that every voice is heard, that the advocacy for our open spaces in our North Brooklyn community continues. And it's an honor to be co-moderating with Ron, a friend and mentor. So with that, I'd like to just share, I consider myself a daughter of the South Side, Los Sures, Williamsburg. I was born and raised there and continued to advocate for my fellow neighbors and hometown. This is an important time for our district, as I have represented what would be this district as mentioned, and there is great challenges ahead of us, but wonderful things also can happen when we are working together. And so I'd like to just take a moment to acknowledge that Greenpoint and Williamsburg are situated on Koskoj, the ancestral land of the Koskoj people, a subtribe of the Lenni Lenape in Lenapehoking, the Lenape homeland. Their homeland includes now known as Newtown Creek, which separates North Brooklyn and Queens. This land is part of the unceded traditional lands of the Lenni, Lenape. We honor and respect the original caretakers of this land, whose ancestral knowledge continues to guide the Lenape people in this homeland and throughout the Lenape diaspora. We honor, respect, and offer our care and gratitude to the land, water, air, and the elements that continue to hold us together through these turbulent times. Ron?
Thank you, Diana. It's a pleasure to be here with you and with Frances and all the people who've organized this event. We recognize the trauma that took place here and are indebted to the sacrifices of its original peoples and those enslaved to work on this land. As community dwellers and visitors and workers, we commit to learn how to be better stewards of this land, tell its story, and actively resist oppression. We also acknowledge the brutal cultural and social shifts caused by gentrification and the financialization of housing, and take a moment for the brown and Black communities most impacted by displacement and who continue to suffer the worst impacts of environmental justice. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today, because many of these fights have taken place in Williamsburg and Greenpoint over the decades that I've had the opportunity to work with the people within this community. And I have had the enormous pleasure and honor of learning from Luis Gardner Costa, who is no longer with us, and from Francis Lucerno, and those folks who founded both El Puente and Los Sures. This is a community that I've worked with since the mid-70s. on a continual basis. And while it is not where I live, it is my home in many, many ways. So it's with great pleasure that I'm here and serving as moderator with Diana.
Thank you for that, Ron. It's amazing how many friends we've worked with along those years. And with that, I introduce our first segment of candidates from the 33rd District. We will aim for 3 half-hour-long segments so that we can get to know well the platforms and agenda of each candidate when it comes to parks and open space. Join me in welcoming Elizabeth Adams, Sabrina Gates, Tova Potowski, and Stuart Sherman.
Yay, I'm here.
Okay, you're all there. We invite you all to share your opening statements about what your parks and open space priorities would be as council members. You have not more than 30 seconds, and the timer will help you stay on track throughout the forum. 30 seconds per response, 2 minutes total for all of you who are here today. Go at it, my friends.
Hi. So parks and green spaces are racial and social justice issues. It is about our environmental health and well-being and how we care for one another. I was a longtime community organizer with Planned Parenthood, where I helped expand access to healthcare locally. And I take that same approach with our parks and our environment and the importance of creating healthy, sustainable neighborhoods for all of us to thrive and to raise our families with the resources and support that we need and deserve. We have longer to go. Is that 30 seconds?
That was perfect.
Thank you.
Good evening. Let me start by thanking your organizations for including me this evening. My name is Sabrina Gates, and I too am a candidate for New York City Council District 33. While I grew up just outside of the city, like so many individuals that now call this place home, I stepped foot here and never left. I have lived in the district for more than 15 years, and I absolutely love it. It is diverse in so many ways. It is easy to get caught up in the problems, of which there are many, like the inequities in healthcare and education, or the problems of social justice, climate change, housing, and struggling small businesses. But we forget to celebrate what is good, which is the richness of the people who make up our communities. This is what keeps me going. The desire to see people thrive, not just survive. I started my career in the nonprofit sector. I've worked with college students, worked with after-school programs, teaching financial literacy, and I've also run my own small business. All of these have given me the most amazing opportunities to see the extraordinary work that community-based organizations are doing.
Thank you, Sabrina.
Thanks.
Toba?
Okay, thanks. So my name is Toba. I'm running for the 33rd. I'll put it on my screen, I promise. I'm the co-founder and former president of the Cabot Park Conservancy. So it's interesting. So my whole career into being a candidate for a variety of reasons, but one reason is parks and how parks have been neglected. And then through my advocacy as the co-founder of the Cabot Park Conservancy, I realized how communities of color have really been neglected in every single way. And I'm a big supporter of reparative justice, which includes the expansion of green spaces throughout areas of communities of color.
Thank you very much, Tova.
And education. Okay, thanks. We'll get time. So thank you.
Yeah. Yes, it's my turn. Hi, my name is Stu Sherman. I'm also running for City Council in District 33. I'm a legal service attorney. I run free legal clinics at hospitals and health centers, including at North Brooklyn's Public Hospital, Woodhull. To me, parks are also public health. We've seen throughout the pandemic how chronic illnesses exacerbate disease, as well as how lack of access to open spaces leads to chronic illness. So I think we need to view parks and park equity as also public health equity and survival for our neighborhoods and for our communities. And that's why parks and parks funding is a priority for me in this race and in my run.
Thank you, Stu. We appreciate those opening statements. I know it's not easy to keep the time, but you guys are doing very well. We would like to now take this time to ask a question that we'll be asking all the candidates. Let's start with Elizabeth Adams, and you will get 75 seconds to answer what would be with your response. Parks are often stressed for adequate and sustainable funding. While much of North Brooklyn has specific environmental justice needs and open spaces act as key tools for mitigation, do you have specific policy proposals to secure stable investments and address the community's environmental justice legacy?
Thank you. Yes. So I think this has to be top priority of the next council member for the 33rd district. The history of environmental abuse and racism that has happened in the district. We have multiple Superfund sites and brownfield. So remediation and fighting for greener open space and parks is essential to how we move forward and build the greener future that we need. There are a few priorities that I am focused on. One, I support the Play Fair Council Budget Initiative and would push for more funding in the City Council. Many municipalities dedicate much more funding, much more of a percentage of their budget to parks. I would shift and prioritize New York City's funding. And then I would use the council discretionary funding to make sure that equity is centered. So litter basket, sanitation needs, and park space investments that the council can do through the specific member discretionary funding, make sure that that is invested in communities of color. Overall, I think it is about priorities, and this mayor and this administration has not prioritized the parks. The last thing that we are owed multiple parks. We have 3 in the district that we've been waiting for 15 years. I think we need stronger advocacy and approach from our elected officials. And I would consider, taking legal action in the form of a lawsuit to get the parks that we are owed to move forward on getting our green space. Thank you.
Excellent timing.
Hi. So among the initiatives that I would propose is, one, to increase our funding. As we all know, parks do not get nearly the amount of funding that they need to survive, not just for maintenance projects, but also to increase staffing needs, as well as survey potential projects in other areas. I would conduct a community resource survey to survey the spaces that are existing within our district that provide an opportunity for open spaces that aren't currently served. I believe that people should be able to walk to parks or open spaces in their areas. I think we need to push for whatever outstanding shovel-ready projects we can. I think we need to push those forward. We need to repair the park's crumbling infrastructure because we need to make sure that everything available already is a sound space for people to play. I think there's also an opportunity for us to utilize open spaces that aren't normally perceived.
Sabrina, forgive me, can you increase your volume or get closer to the mic? You're coming in very low.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, much better.
Okay. I'm really close.
You have about 10 seconds left.
Okay, so I would utilize spaces that would not normally be seen as green spaces, including making green roofs something different than what we typically perceive them, and perhaps opening them up to create park spaces and gardens for people who live in those buildings. Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Toba.
Okay, thanks. So as many people who love parks as I do, and here's my organization's t-shirt, is that the budget was cut from 1% of the annual city budget, and now it's 0.5%. And then in January, the budget was cut $70 million more. Huge mistake. The city desperately needs these spaces. I also want to talk a little bit about, it's one thing to say that you support Playfair. I was there with Playfair every single step of the way in local advocacy and also testifying in front of the city council. I also think we need to be looking at fair wages for our parks employees. And also, this is really important. I just don't have enough time, and maybe we'll get to it. Is we have to look at how parks spends their money. We have to spend smarter. We have to be wiser. I advocated strongly to renovate a public bathroom. They came back with $1.5 million for apartment rent. I know it's Brooklyn, but $1.5 million to renovate a bathroom is outrageous. And in Coney Island, to budget $4 million to build a brand new bathroom is outrageous. So there's two things. We have to advocate very strongly and not say no, get back to 1%, at least 1%, but we also need additional funds for that backload of $30 million, 30 years of backlog on projects all throughout the city. I think I used up my time.
Stu?
Thank you. So Environmental justice is at the core of my parks plan and my priority. As I said in my opening, parks are public health. And as we've seen, we need open spaces, we need equitable access to parks in order to not only build our communities and create connectivity, but also increase health in our communities, which is why equitable financing is essential for my plan and for my vision for the district. First, we need a district-wide review of our open spaces to make sure that they are funded equitably and places that have been underserved get adequate funding and resources. In addition, on a budgetary level, I think we're at what, 5.6% of our budget goes to parks. We need at least 1 to 2% if we want a modern, healthy city in which open spaces are prioritized. And also in communities in which open spaces have not traditionally been granted, where there aren't parks, they need money to build those and create them. So funding is essential, as well as equity is essential in any parks program. And we need to fight to make sure that a budget includes enough resources to ameliorate the wrongs of the past, which have come to roost in the past year.
Thank you. That was perfect in terms of time. I'm going to go to the second question now, and it has to do with the fact that in 2025 will be the 20th anniversary of the promise of Bushwick Inlet Park. I must say, parenthetically, I was the community planner at that time, working on the 197A plan with both Williamsburg and Greenpoint. So this question is dear to my own heart. 2 mayors and 16 years later, the city's budget still does not include full funding to complete the park. As the third council member to serve during the park's construction, how will you ensure that the park is fully realized and open to the public by 2025? Or, in an effort to create more park space, the city has relied on privately owned public spaces in the recent years. What do you think about these efforts? Do you have intentions to reduce or expand these types of spaces in North Brooklyn? How do you plan to address inequities created resulting from decisions that have prioritized real estate interests? So you've got 2 questions as part of question 2. And let's start with Sabrina Gates and go around the table in the same order that we did before. So Sabrina, it's up to you. 75 seconds.
So that's a big question. So I'll start with saying that I think that POPs are an opportunity to provide open space. But unfortunately, I don't think they service communities the way that they should. I would not discourage them. However, I would rather see monetary resources going into supporting full park projects like Bushwick Inlet Park. I think that if we're going to navigate a field where we're making these negotiations with developers, it has to be put strategically into a plan that benefits the community at large. I think there's no real incentive for developers who basically put these spaces in place, or the buildings that manage them, to promote them for community members to come and seek them out. Whereas parks are part of our city's overall environment and welcome to all. And so we need to put our efforts and our money and our resources to those ends. Being the third council member, I think, as I said, I believe in increasing the city budget towards parks. And I think that Bushwick Inlet Park, among other park projects, has to be at the top of getting things done because it services a community that is in dire need of park space. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go on to Toba.
Okay. So you're looking at somebody who 30 years ago went to all the community board meetings regarding turning the piers in downtown Brooklyn, Dumbo area into a park. I'm talking about Brooklyn Bridge Park. So I've been living in the neighborhood for almost 40 years. And I was there when they first talked about it. So I understand, Ron and Deanna, what you guys are expressing, that frustration. And then we have to be careful, because look what happened with Brooklyn Bridge Park, and that it then ended up developers became and played a very, very strong role in getting what they want. I think we have to walk a very fine line regarding developers in park and understand that the parks belong to New York City. Parks belong to the people of New York City, all people, and not to developers. And I think if need be, if you're looking at $100 million for Bushwick Inlet Park, those are tough numbers. I'm saying that, you know, we've got to be careful. We have to find ways to fund the park. I believe that the city has an obligation to fully fund that park on its own without those relationships. But I also understand we're heading into some tough times financially. The priority has to be the other strong fight that I had real quick was 16 years ago. Ken Fisher was our city councilman for the 33rd. He had put together the plan for renovating Cadman Plaza Park, and then he left office, and then David Yaskey took over, right? And we had to go to David Yaskey and make sure that the funds and everything were allocated to renovate the park. And thankfully, we were strong enough, we did it, and we benefited. I've been there with you.
Okay, Stuart.
Thank you. So this is a very important question, especially my community, the end of my block, is where Bushwood Inlet Park should be. Bushwood Inlet Park is an 11-year plus broken promise by the city in which, in exchange for redeveloping the waterfront and building multi-story ultra towers, there was supposed to be a park. There is not a park. And there needs to be funding for it, to build it, to fulfill that promise to the community and to the people that live there. The developers benefited from this, as well as they continue to benefit from it, so it should play a role in funding it. And we need to get that funding as a priority. Regarding POPs, I would prefer in all cases to have the public parks that are publicly owned by the city. If there is an opportunity to use green space through a POP, I'm not averse to it, but I am reluctant to let developers use that as leverage to get their developments done. I think we're seeing that right now with 2 trees on River Street, in which they presented a giant luxury development as a parks plan, as opposed to what it really is. So I think we need to be taking control of our public spaces and building publicly accessible public parks, and not letting developers leverage that and then break their promises with us.
Elizabeth, it's your turn.
Hi, thank you. So past and current administration's failure to follow through on the parks that we are owed, specifically Bushwick Inlet Park, have severely eroded trust in our government. You know, we cannot ask people to have faith and engage in our land use process, in our housing process, if promises that were made 16 years later still go unfulfilled. We got the towers, right, but we didn't get the parks. And so I think that has to be the starting place of how we hold this government accountable in providing the public space that we're owed. I mentioned stronger legal action. I think that is one thing to consider. Working with community members against, you know, this administration, you know, and I think that with POPs, they're often a fraught solution. You know, we have government to ensure access equitably to our public space. And unfortunately, many times POPs have had access issues, sometimes with policing, with restrictions, even against, you know, as they were supposed to be universally accessible to people. So I think we really need to look at how we do more in working with our administration to get the green space that we are owed. And then I'm a really strong proponent of public action and working with community members. I think
Thank you.
Organizing has won us a lot.
Diana, why don't you go on to the next round of questions?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ron. So this is the segment where we want to just share with the public. Our candidates have the opportunity to fill out questionnaires in advance, and we want to follow up on some of their answers. We're going to start with Toba. Okay. You've written how parks are the great equalizer, and referenced New York City's big, well-funded parks as examples of that success. But North Brooklyn is peppered with small parks that don't have the space, vegetation, funding, or clean air and soil that allow for safe and healthy use. How would you address this inherent inequity? And just give me at least one example of what that particular small park we're referring to that doesn't have all of these essential items.
So thanks for the question. I wish we could spend days talking about this.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. Well, you know what? All of us have. We've done it for years, right? And so I was a member of the Strand, the Brooklyn Strand, and that started, I think, at the beginning of the de Blasio administration, or started with Bloomberg. And that was to look at all the parks in downtown Brooklyn in the general area. One of the things, and I'm very close with former Senator Velman at Montgomery, and we did a tour of Commodore Barry Park and some of the other parks. Everybody, who loves parks, they know in Brooklyn we have over 800 small parks, mostly small parks. And one of the things when they talk about the inequity of our smaller parks is the fact that Brooklyn Bridge gets all the hoopla, and Prospect Park gets all this, and of course the beaches. But we do need to be focusing on the smaller parks. And it was my experience in working on the Brooklyn Strand to open my eyes to the fact that, listen, we have all these green spaces, and it doesn't matter the size of it. And you meet other people who have passion for smaller parks, as I do, and you get a chance to say, listen, for a smaller investment, we can change the lives of so many people who live in these communities, but also gain an education, bringing them into the process. People who live in certain communities can become part of the process where they haven't felt welcome before.
Thank you. Ron.
Stu Sherman, do you believe that pursuing supplemental revenue streams like fees from park improvement districts assessed to developers and managed by the community are worthwhile? Why or why not?
Yeah, we need to generate more revenue for our parks. As I mentioned, New York's parks are underfunded significantly, and while I am supportive of trying to increase in the city budget that to like 1 to 2%, we also need dedicated revenue streams when they are available in order to fund parks. And I believe that these are acceptable and actually welcome in order to provide enough money to build and maintain parks on existing spaces. As I mentioned in an earlier answer, a lot of developers benefit from these. They benefit in terms of quality of life and what they try to sell people. And this is an ample opportunity to create revenue streams for parks in neighborhoods where real estate has really benefited through hyper development in recent years. So yes, I am supportive of that.
Diana?
Thank you. So this question is for Elizabeth. Participatory budgeting has helped fund capital improvements in many parks across the city, but the process can require highly engaged champions to build a campaign for a funded project. How do you ensure that this process centers equity and that projects in underserved parts of the community have a fair shot?
Thank you. So my background is in community organizing, and participatory governance and participatory budgeting, I think, is core to our government. How we are using our government tools to reach people directly where they are. I think we have to take the approach of meeting people where they are in access to information and to getting involved in our political process. A few things I would like to do. One is ongoing community groups in different parts of the district. That's one thing I've been doing with my campaign, is really tapping into local leaders to set up conversations with neighbors that are ongoing relational organizing. So I think that's how we support infrastructure in neighborhoods that are already there, that we listen to directly impacted leaders, and not just once a year, but having it be an ongoing process. So I would also like to set up organizations within NYCHA community leaders of having pop-up hours. So pop-up offices I want to set up around the district to really be in spaces. Thank you.
That's excellent. Ron.
Okay, I'm going to go to Sabrina. Our parks and open space are our public squares. They serve many purposes for the community, but many are in disrepair or poorly designed. How do you plan to prioritize projects without solely responding to the loudest voices?
So I think that we need to prioritize the parks based on need. I believe, as I said earlier, that people should be able to walk to parks within their vicinity and not travel long distances. Parks are our town squares. They're also our backyards. Kids need opportunities to play. People need opportunities to congregate and organize, and usually parks provide a space for that. And so it has to be based off of need. I would start with those communities that are underserved and push for that to be the priority no matter what.
Diana, why don't we go to round two?
Yeah, I'm so happy. We're right on time. So this is a luxury because we didn't think we were going to get this far. I'm going to start with Toba. You are an advocate for building a seawall from Red Hook to Greenpoint to protect Brooklyn waterfront communities from sea level rise as well as storm surges. A seawall would cut off those same communities from their waterfront and create other problems. Do you have other plans for protecting communities that integrate more human and ecologically friendly options? Keep in mind, public housing has been a tradition for being built along what would be highways and waterfront shorelines.
Thanks. So it's such a great question. And like I said, I wish we had more time to talk about this. The seawall that I imagine is just something that I know that the former administration in Washington, D.C. Defunded, looking at seawall, any kind of seawall that we're looking at to protect the waterfront has to be integrated with sea life, and it has to be done smartly. As it pertains to affordable housing and public housing, things like that. I mean, you couldn't find a stronger advocate for that than me. So I mean, there's so much in that's in your question, but I think the one thing that is important to know is that, I would say for more than, I know I'm running out of time, for more than 15 years, I've been fighting for parks and fighting for communities. And as a city council member, there's just something I want to say that I think I'm going to run out of time. And so I'm so sorry about it. When you go and you testify in front of the city council, when it comes to parks, first it's the unions, it's the elected officials, then it's the unions, and it's the people who love parks and love communities who are the last ones to get to testify. And we're there for hours. And I've been there a number of times.
Can you just share exactly what other plan would you provide?
Tough. It's tough to go and to do it. All I can tell you is that we have to be smart because the polar caps are melting, the sea is rising. We have to be able to plan for that. Just like it's happening in Manhattan, they're planning for that and they're implementing that plan. But it has to be integrated into the communities. Communities first, right? That's what we're doing it for, to save the community. So that's actually.
And just a follow-up question with that, have you had conversations with the Red Hook community about those other options?
With the Red Hook community? No, I have not.
Okay, thank you. Ron.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to Stu Sherman on this next question. You've proposed community level advisory boards as a reform to the existing public input process when designing and scoping city parks. What would this proposal mean for the existing role of community boards when it comes to parks issues?
This proposal is driving out of recent issues with near Bushwood Inlet Park with the Marshall P. Johnson Park, in which they proposed building a giant plastic mural against community wishes, against any input, without any insight from what people actually want and what's needed. In my view, that's something the advisory board can work with community boards, but on a specific level to provide insight and input into where space is needed, and to make sure that it can be more regionalized than a community board, which is a lot broader scope, and can make sure that it serves the open space needs of underserved communities. And also, an important thing I mentioned in this answer is the need to get participation across the digital divide. I think a lot of information is disseminated, especially during the pandemic, through technological means, and that really limits the amount of input certain communities, certain members of the community can provide. So I think a lot more needs to be done, community board level and advisory level, in order to disseminate information and get input from the community on any issue regarding parks and open spaces.
Diana?
Thank you. This question is for Elizabeth. You propose implementing a community enforcement model to mitigate for racialized harassment during NYPD park patrols. What does that look like? How would it protect Black and Brown residents from racial profiling, and be as specific as possible.
Yeah, thank you. So we have turned to the NYPD as our default for really everything under the sun. 95% of what the NYPD currently responds to is not violent crime. And so we need to look at our budget, at the ways that we have relied on NYPD to solve quality of life or community needs. That I think fundamentally needs to be switched in terms of when it comes to healthcare and crisis response. I've worked with constituents who were in moments of emotional crises, who, I called the mental health crisis line. They told me 24 to 48 hours. That is not an emergency response. So
Elizabeth, I'm sorry, was that at a park?
No, it was not at a park.
So this has to do with park patrols.
So specifically for park patrol.
Correct.
I think we need to be investing in our agencies, investing in, DOT and parks, and really ramping up the budget of people who know the parks intimately. When we were doing the review of Marsha P. Johnson, the people who work in the parks know how people behave, know how things are acting. And so they are the eyes and ears of our parks, and that's where we need to be ramping up our support and staffing for.
And do you believe that this community enforcement model is something that you've discussed with the groups that you're meeting with as far as community residents are concerned? And do they represent Black and Brown residents?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked with a number of racial justice organizations when it comes to community enforcement. I haven't had specific conversations around our parks, but particularly Black women-led organizations like Brooklyn Movement Center. There are a number of organizations that I really look to in terms of leadership around enforcement.
Thank you. Ron.
Okay, I have another question for Sabrina. It seems like I'm asking you the questions. You propose a block-by-block assessment in underserved areas to identify open space opportunities. Would that assessment make recommendations and consider the acquisition of privately owned land? And can you commit to completing the assessment during your first year in office and posting it publicly?
Yes, I think that's definitely a priority, not just for parks, but for a number of resources that are needed within the community, especially for my district. I can't promise that for everyone's district, but I would definitely let our districts be served as a model. In terms of the space, where owners were not willing to negotiate the sale of that space, I would ask that we lease those spaces and perhaps partner with programs or organizations like Kaboom to create playground space for communities temporarily until more long-term solutions can be found. But I think we need to address the problems that exist now in terms of lack of opportunity in certain areas. And that is a space, those are spaces that we can utilize. I've walked about every block in this district 10 times over, and I can point to some of those areas already. And so I know that that's something that we can start to look at and do going forward.
You know, the city's charter requires that there be a fair share of benefits and burdens in communities, and Williamsburg and Greenpoint have had their overwhelming share of the burdens. Would you fight to use the fair share laws to also create more open space?
Definitely. I think that's an opportunity. There are things. Yes, the short answer is yes.
And the final question is, would you, I may have missed it, but I want to make sure you address the issue. Would you take private property for public space?
Absolutely not. I think that's a conversation that needs to be had. As I said, I would work with landowners to see if they would be willing to sell their space. If they are not willing to sell their space, to look at leasing as an alternative option with like 2-year terms until we can find more permanent solutions to the problem. I think when we have just lots sitting there and not serving any purposes in our community, and people are stuck on potential projects in the future that don't exist now, and there's a community need that needs to be serviced, we can do that now. And I think I think it lends itself to making their spaces also more valuable within the context of the greater community.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
To-
We are going to take a moment, Ron, to just take a still picture. So I want everyone to just wave. And thank you so much. You guys were awesome. And we'll see you June 22nd. Don't forget to vote. To our public, remain on the line. We are going into our second segment of panel.
Remember, it's ranked choice voting, folks.
So as we transition, my name is Willis Elkins with the Newtown Creek Alliance. We're going to bring on the next round of candidates for the 33rd District. And to make this a little bit more interactive, we have included a fun quiz for not just the candidates, but also all the attendees who are watching as well. So we're going to pull up some questions here and see how well everybody knows our parks and our open space issues. So the first one, what is this newest open space in North Brooklyn? And we'll pull up the poll here in a sec. All right, and the results, so almost everybody got it. This is the Newtown Creek Nature Walk. The next slide has a few fun facts about that. Just opened this week after waiting many years. And we're very excited to have it open. So for those who want to check it out, it is now available. You can now visit it from the existing Nature Walk on Page Avenue or the new entrance on Kingsland Avenue as well. And the next one, what is this rendering of a future park? There are the results, the fun facts. Almost everyone got this, the BQ Green. Many years in the making, and will take many years to make this a reality. And of course, shout out to Diana Reyna for all of her work on this in the past. And our last polling question. What percentage of the NYC Parks Department budget was cut last year during COVID-19? Ooh, all across the board here, answers. So 39%, no, that is the visits. The correct answer, I believe, is 14% was the budget cut. Maybe Katie can chime in and clarify there. But obviously a major issue for New York City parks going forward, and I'm sure we'll discuss this more going forward. With that, we'll have another one of these segments between the next round, but I will kick it back to the moderators to introduce our next round of candidates.
Candidates, we invite you to share your opening statements about what your parks and open space priorities would be as a council member. You have not more than 30 seconds, and the timer will help you stay on track throughout the forum. 30 seconds per response, and then there'll be 2 minutes total for all of your candidates. So why don't we start with Victoria?
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Victoria Cumbranas. I'm born and raised in Greenpoint. I'm the daughter of immigrants. My dad is from Guatemala. My mom's from Poland. And I grew up breathing in the air from the incinerator, the pollution coming out of Newhart, playing in my playground across the street, and of course, dangling my feet off of the old piers before they fell into the East River. I know what it means to fight for equity because my community, my working class community in Greenpoint, the Latinos, the immigrants, the people who have been surviving the devastation of environmental injustice are the people who I am fighting for in this race. Those are the people who have not been represented in District 33 properly for many years. And those are the people who we need to fight for most.
Okay. Lincoln, you're next in line. So
it's wonderful to be with you all. Thank you, Diana and Ron, two of our local heroes and the great community orgs that have brought us together. Many of you know me. I'm a Greenpointer and I'm a lifelong resident of our district. It is reprehensible that 15 years after the failed Williamsburg Greenpoint rezoning, we have seen all of the development, but the city has failed to follow through on the primary promise made to our community. We got the towers. Where are our parks? Bushwick Inlet and Box Street are stuck in bureaucratic purgatory, and we need a council member who will conduct aggressive campaigns in partnerships with the organizations hosting this forum and our community to get promised parks. Thank you.
Let's go to April.
Yes, hi, thank you so much. I'm April Sumbun. I'm running because I understand what it's like to struggle and I want to make sure everyone has a fair chance. I was born in a refugee camp and we fled communism from Laos and we came with nothing. I'm living the American dream. I'm an outsider with a clean slate and a new vision who has lived through it all from poverty to where I am today. Parks are essential to our quality of life and our health, and it will create a more resilient climate change. It will be more resilient to climate change. Without parks, I don't know what I would have done during the pandemic with my children and throughout my childhood living in Section 8 housing. I promise the way I champion for my children is the type of champion I'll be for you.
Benjamin, you're next.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, I think open space is necessary and a right of all the citizens of New York. We need to think about it creatively. We need to look at all the space we have. We don't have to build on everything. Any empty lot is important and can be used for recreation. And we also need our space to be flexible. We need it to be used for gardening and compost, for recreation, for relaxation. And we need playgrounds to be there for neurodiverse community members. So I want to look at parks to serve the needs as the community defines them. So I would work with all our community members to increase and improve our open space.
Thank you. Diana, why don't I turn it over to you to ask the first question?
Thank you, Ron. So I want to thank all the candidates for being here. We would like to now ask a very specific question that we will be asking all of our candidates today. Parks and open spaces are often stressed for adequate and sustainable funding. While much of North Brooklyn has specific environmental justice needs and open spaces act as key tools for mitigation, do you have specific policy proposals to secure stable investments and address the community's environmental justice legacy? If so, please explain.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
A Green New Deal from Greenpoint to Gowanus has been one of the central policies of my candidacy, and it's something that I've been fighting for many years. Not only is Biden's infrastructure plan and his discussion last night of a Green New Deal as a jobs program, it's also an economic recovery program. We can put people back to work, we can create resiliency plans, we can shore up our park spaces, and ensure that we can restore the capital budget to the Parks Department in the 2022 year budget so that we can actually pay employees enough and have enough employees to maintain our
Victoria, if you can just be specific with the policy proposal of new investment.
Sure.
Stable investment.
Sure, absolutely. Well, the Green New Deal is part of that. It's part of allowing for new parks to be built. It allows our parks to be expanded. Of course, Bushwick Inlet Park is one of those parks that we do have to find $100 million of investment for. And I am strongly against public-private partnerships to do that because we have seen in the past that they are used for greenwashing and for building giant towers and not getting the parks that we need. And
so you believe 100% government funding?
Absolutely. And we need to restore the Parks Department budget in order to do that.
Thank you. Let's continue with Lincoln.
Right. Our district has been an epicenter of environmental injustice, from the largest oil spill in the continental United States to taking 30-something% of the garbage from all across New York City into North Brooklyn. We have an enormous amount of work to do. And that's why we've centered environmental justice and a plan to make ours the first carbon neutral district as the centerpiece of our campaign. It includes our vision for carbon neutrality in the 33rd Council District includes 53 concrete initiatives for how we drive down emissions from our buildings, our transportation, our waste. Of course, central to that plan for carbon neutrality is more green space and funding and sustaining our open space. I think never more than during this pandemic have we all depended on and loved our parks. Our parks are essential to our air quality, our health, youth development, just plain joy. And we need to start at putting 1% of city funds into the budget. We should not be passing a budget that does not have 1% of funding dedicated to the construction, to capital projects, and to the maintenance of our parks. And
Lincoln, do you commit 1% of your specific council district budget to park and open space?
I would commit 1% of my budget to parks and open space.
And would you work with the community board to secure 1% of their budget requests to be dedicated to?
I would be eager to work with CB1 and CB2 and CB3 so that they are prioritizing their requests around open space as well, especially the long promised open space that we've been waiting for 15 years. 1% is a starting point. We should be pushing for more. But if there was a metric that I hope to be measured on, it's how much new green space, how much new open space we develop under the term that I would serve in the city council if I'm lucky enough to be there.
Thank you. So I want to just go to Benjamin, but reminding everyone, we have to make sure that when we're advocating for parks, 1% is just part of what is the charter call for the minimum requirement for the city, that it actually never gets met. But if we have all 51 council districts representatives dedicating 1% of their own specific budgets, that will push the city beyond the 1%. And so our advocacy as residents of New York City have to start with our local politics, our council members. Benjamin.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, obviously 1% is too low. It has to be a priority. And I want to point out that I think we need dedicated, looking at our budget overall, we need to reform many aspects of it. And Toba hit on the capital process and procurement. We waste an insane amount of money that way. And we need to do that. That will help free up funding that we could dedicate. And then, obviously in the NYPD and then in homeless services, there's amazing, tremendous savings to be made that we could dedicate. I would want to definitely, we need to increase the overall budget, but I want to increase, I think, funding towards groups like yours, not to pander, but also to schools. And we need to give real support to friends groups to be part of this, because there's nothing like personal involvement in the parks that, people love it. It's a great time. They want to go out and do it, but we leave them hanging. We form a friends group and then offer no real support. So I want to make sure there's funding going to all those community organizations to keep this going. So, I think we need to obviously also make sure we have maintenance there. And I think, increasing staffing for the parks is crucial too. So that's what I would work on.
Thank you very much. And I just want to make sure that we ask each of our candidates, would you commit what would be 1% of your budget, capital and expense, 1% for each category, what would be to parks and open space? I'd like to ask Victoria.
Oh, absolutely. That would be a starting point.
Lincoln, we already heard you. Would you commit 1% to the expense as well?
Certainly, I'd be happy to commit 1%, but I'd hope that we could do a whole lot more. I would do more than 1%.
I appreciate that. We'll hold you to that. Benjamin?
Yeah, I've committed all of my capital allocation to participatory budgeting. So I would, rely on that system and outreach to the entire community on how the community's initiatives get met.
So you would not commit to 1% to parks?
Well, I would say that parks are a main beneficiary of participatory budgeting quite often, but I would want to hear how the community wants to spend the money.
Thank you. April, you're next and last on this question.
Yes, thank you so much. I do support the goal of, and I will commit 1% of my budget to parks and recs. As your next city council member, I will serve on the Parks and Recreation Committee and fight to restore the parks budget and advocate to ensure that the budget is equally distributed to the lower income neighborhoods. One way that I feel as though we can get money for our parks that are not seen right now and needs to come to fruition is re-examining the NYPD budget and reimagining how we use that money, and taking some of that money, and as I've stated on my website, on my contract with District 33, is that we will use NYPD budget towards parks and recs. That is one way I feel as though that we can see things come to fruition. And I would do a complete audit of all of our parks and spaces in District 33 and see how we can use it. I am also in support of a chief public realm position at City Hall to ensure that people get the adequate space in the open parks and green spaces that they need and our city and our residents deserve. Someone who grew up poor, living in Section 8 housing, I get it. I understand the need for green space and for our health and our mental, for our mental health and our well-being.
Thank you. That was perfectly timed. Ron?
Okay, before I go into question priority 2, the priority 2 question, which I'm supposed to ask, I want to follow up on something that Diana just asked. Yes, you could set aside 1% of your capital budget in a variety of ways, but you also have a role in the city's overall budgeting process. And can you do something around the capital budget that you would get the city to provide some communities, such as Greenpoint, Williamsburg, which have a deficit of open space, with more than 1%? And so when you're answering the next question I'm going to ask you in your round, please also address that point of how would you go about making sure there's more money for open space than there is traditionally available in Community Board 1 and in your districts. The question I really, and this is a question close to me in many ways, 2025 will be the 20th anniversary of the promise of Bushwick Inlet Park. I happen to have worked with the community on that proposal. 2 mayors and 16 years later, the city's budget still does not include full funding to complete the park. As the 3rd council member to serve during the park's construction, how will you ensure that the park is fully realized and open to the public by 2025? That's part 1 of that question. The second one, in an effort to create more park space, which relates to the other question I asked you, the city has relied on privately owned public spaces, or what we call POPs, in recent years. What do you think about these efforts? Do you have intentions to reduce or expand these types of spaces in North Brooklyn? How do you plan to address inequities created resulting from decisions that have been prioritized real estate interests only? We'll start with Lincoln and we'll go around after that.
Thank you, Ron. I'll try my best to get to do each of those 3 big questions, and I'll try to be as specific as possible to not get in trouble with Diana. So very briefly, on your first question, we must take an equity-oriented approach to parks funding. The way that too much of our parks funding has materialized is depending on the local council member to fund projects in his or her district. And instead, we should be demanding from the mayor's office and the parks department that they put significant capital resources aside with an equity-oriented approach. The Community Parks Initiative was just a drop in the bucket of what we actually need, and be funding parks in the neighborhoods at significant scale that need it. When you talk about Northern Greenpoint, where you can be walking a mile to get to green space, when you talk about the south side of Williamsburg or South Williamsburg, which is severely lacking in green space, our communities should be near the top of the list for new investments in park space. And we have shovel-ready projects that are ready to go, from BQ Green to Box Street Park to Bushwick Inlet. If I'm lucky enough to get elected as it relates to Bushwick Inlet Park, this would be my top funding priority in North Brooklyn. I would sit the next mayor down and I would try my best to persuade him or her that we could rapidly build a shovel-ready park, and that would be a legacy-defining open space and one of the crown jewels of New York City. As the council member, I would also work to secure funding commitments from the speaker, from the Brooklyn delegation, the borough president, our local assembly members and state senators. Conservatively, we should be able to secure tens of millions of dollars in capital funding from local elected officials, and then take that commitment to the mayor and say, you will do the remainder. I'm out on time. You want me to stop? So I didn't get the 3rd question, but I'll just say in closing, if sweetness doesn't work, we will take as combative approaches as need be, and the next mayor better damn follow up on the promises made of his or her predecessors, and we'll do everything we need to do together to make it happen.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lincoln. Benjamin?
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, Bushwick Inlet Park, we don't want to rehash the last 15 years. It should have been done. There's no doubt about it. Will it be done by 2025? I don't know, probably not, maybe not, but what we need to do is continue to move forward. There's a lot of priorities in the city. And our priority is Bushwick Inlet. We're moving ahead on 50 Kent. Motiva will begin moving ahead. We've got a lot of work to do on Bayside and city storage. Obviously, we want to get that building down and get those remediated and built. So I think that we just need to make sure that there is constant funding coming to it and that the progress is moving forward towards getting it done. We can't tolerate any more delays. It's going to take a lot of money and a lot of time. So hopefully by 2025, but certainly soon after. I think the public spaces, it's very complicated. I think the waterfront esplanades that we've gotten from in the agreement from the 2005 rezoning are sort of a sham and a joke on public space in the city. They'll be nice eventually, but they are behind buildings. It's hard to get to. There's such a wide variety of the way they're maintained. If we had proper funding in the parks, they could all be city operated. We let the developers build them, and then we maintain them, maintain hours and security. Domino Park has ended up. It's a great park. Everybody loves it. I won't comment on River Ring at the moment. That's a huge subject, but basically, I think parks should be publicly funded and come through public processes.
Yeah, you fit the time, so you get some extra credit for that. April?
Gold star.
Yes. It's power with the people, right? I believe in coalition building, working with nonprofits and organizations and elected officials to help us gain the capital funding that's needed for the park. We have to think differently. For example, I've worked in nonprofit and corporations. My role has been partnerships, creating multi-million-dollar partnerships. So one example would be, we got to hold our elected officials accountable. We have to also work with the city council members to ensure that they contribute, but also as you know, the candidates get city matching funds. Wouldn't it be cool if we got the people, the residents of New York City to pitch in $1, $2, and it's matched by the city every single time towards our parks. I think that we have to think differently. If the capital money isn't coming in, we have to work with people and organizations to make sure that the parks come to fruition. In regards to public places that are also privately owned, we have to work with them too. I mean, they're going to be there, but I think that there's a way to work with them in terms of, man, if you're going to build on our waterfront, you better be injecting a lot of capital back into our neighborhoods. Is that a yearly fee? 12 million a year back into ensuring that we see Bushwick Inlet Park realized. We can't just let these lands go for free and have these towers being built, but we can negotiate with them and make sure that they are giving us a yearly return on whatever type of profit they're making. It's got to come back, and we got to hold these people accountable.
Thank you for keeping the time. Victoria?
So Bushwick Inlet Park, the Motiva site, 50 Kent, these are all spaces that the council member can play a really, really strong role in land use decisions, which is one of the primary reasons why I'm running for council and not any other seat. It's about protecting land. My grandfather was an indigenous socialist fighting against United Fruit over land, over indigenous land. I understand what displacement and fighting for land means, and parks are our land. They are the great equalizers of our society, and that is why I stand firmly against these public-private partnerships, which use tenets of architectural intimidation, which I believe are extremely racist, and don't allow for the equity that we really deserve to feel in our parks and public spaces. In terms of how we're going to find $100 million for Bushwick Inlet Park, I believe we need to look at models like Brooklyn Bridge Park. We didn't have to build those buildings. I believe the Conservancy was actually a very successful model there, and it's a model that can be brought to other parts. Despite the lawsuit and despite the pushback of the community, I believe the community could have found better sources of funding rather than building those towers, which ended up selling out the community and destroying the view.
Diana, I'm turning it back to you.
Thank you so much, Ron. So this is the segment of our panel where we share with the public that our candidates had filled out questionnaires in advance, and we want to follow up on some of their responses. We're going to start with April. You wrote that when creating new or expanding on existing open space, we must always take into consideration climate change and how we must protect our neighborhoods and residents. Can you provide more details on what that means to you and our most vulnerable neighborhoods? And before you answer that, I'd like to remind our candidates, please speak as slowly and efficiently with your time so that our interpreter is able to keep up the pace as he interprets live. Thank you, Jorge, for your interpretations.
Yes, thank you so much. One example is the BQE, and I support the BQ green 100%. That is one artery, the Robert Moses era, that needs to be dismantled. We need to think bigger and we need to think greener. It's a health crisis. I live next to the BQE and I know other residents all the way to South Williamsburg, Sunset Park, you name it, lives next to the BQE. We cannot be willing to take the sugar rush and the temporary fix. We have to think larger, and that is working with different coalitions and organizations to build a greenway belt that will give people the open space and bring back economic vitality, support our communities and our health and our well-being. That is one way I feel as though that we can use our public spaces to really revitalize and think differently that will help our communities and connect districts and boroughs together.
And just follow up to that, what most vulnerable neighborhood have you worked with, organized around to be able to address what would be on these details considering climate change?
Yes, I'm a part of the BHA, I'm a member and the BQET, and I've been talking and working with them to try to help build coalitions. I work with the Cobble Hill Association and I've, hope to talk to LaSource about this, but it's something that's near and dear to me, and it's something that I will advocate for. Working in the nonprofit industry, I've worked with all different types of organizations, serving neighborhoods, and that's how I would make it happen.
Excellent, thank you.
Yes.
I'd like to ask Benjamin, you wrote that you believe developers should pay higher taxes to support low-income communities as opposed to being compelled to donate to them. Taxation, however, is not within the jurisdiction of New York City Council members. What would you do, if anything, to make sure luxury developers are holistically accountable and contributing to the health and open space of all communities they are impacting if increased tax revenues are not an option?
I think I would sort of begin by trying to limit the number of luxury developments. We've got enough of it going on. We've got housing that people can't afford. So I would prefer to hand over development to community land trusts. But I think the point is, when people do build and do profit from our land, they do need to give back to the community. So in the form, it's particularly complicated, but in the form of community benefit agreements, regular payments, as was mentioned before, whether it's contributions to a particular park or to an organization to steward, I think it's a totally reasonable thing to ask and should be required as a council member, to ask that of developers when they're coming in. It said nobody has the right to a rezoning, and they need to make it work for everybody. There's a lot of things to take into consideration. So yes, while the taxation is ultimately the way to go, and that's not a council member's job, then that's what I would look for.
Thank you, Benjamin.
I'll go to Lincoln now, okay? We're switching roles. Street redesign was a common thread throughout your response. North Brooklyn has a long and proud industrial history with lots of trucks on the street. How would you balance the importance of local heavy industry and the needs for safer streets, greater pedestrianization, and cleaner air?
It's a great question. And our local industrial history, the manufacturing and industrial jobs that we still have in our local IBZs are good jobs. They are jobs where people at much higher rates walk to work, commute from our neighborhoods to local jobs. And it's imperative that we work to protect those jobs. You know, I think we need to do a better job of providing dedicated space in our streetscape for cars and trucks, for cyclists, and for pedestrians. I think we want to expand the amount of pedestrian space as much as we can. We need to have a dedicated network of protected bike lanes, and we need to maintain some truck routes in our community so that the businesses that have been based here for decades and generations are able to continue and to thrive. Those trucks shouldn't be going off route. We've got to protect the safety of our community. Disproportionately, the fatalities from cyclists and pedestrians over the last number of years have happened in industrial areas. And so we do need to take a very close look at how to improve those street designs in those areas so that trucks can continue to operate, but that our community can get around safely. And so that's a major priority for us to balance all of those stakeholders, bring them together, and find common ground.
If I could ask you one question, I don't know how many people remember, but when the rezoning took place, or the 197A plan for Greenpoint, there was a commitment by the City Planning Commission that they would invest and look at creating a high quality industrial zone along Newtown Creek by making sure that they didn't pit industry versus clean air and healthy communities. They never followed through on that. As a council member, what would you do to make sure that they go back to the original agreement when they approved that 197A plan?
You know, this has been a priority, particularly of council members Reyna and Reynoso, and they have, I think, admirably championed this issue over the last number of years, as of a number of our other elected officials and community leaders. And the city administrations under both Bloomberg and de Blasio were too resistant. Antonio and Steve worked with DCP on a North Brooklyn kind of industry and innovation plan. There is a proposal for a rezoning that would better protect some of our industrial areas, especially along Newtown Creek and into East Williamsburg and Eastern Greenpoint. We should push that plan. I think there is a lot of merit in the work that they've done, and we've got to get the next mayor and the next Department of City Planning to the table, and either with honey or vinegar, get it passed.
Thank you. I'm going to go now to Victoria. The 33rd is also home to Brooklyn Bridge Park, which you have hailed as an excellent example of resilient design and a model for waterfront parks. The funding to create and maintain that park seems counter to your stance against architectural intimidation. I really appreciate your use of that term. It really, I think, fits a lot of what happens around the city. How do you reconcile those positions in creating 21st century world-class parks and open spaces?
This is something I actually had a conversation with some of the other candidates in the other panel just a couple of days ago. You know, that was a public-private partnership, and there was you know, luxury development that was put on park space in order to allow for a lot of the conservation work that was done. But we actually realized years later that that influx of money was wholly unnecessary, and the amount of noise, pile driving, and disruption to the general community, you know, the decibel levels of the construction were actually extremely detrimental to the whole process. And so that is a very clear example to me of how building for resiliency can be done with natural, you know, natural sustainable solutions, natural habitats, you know, shoring up the waterfront with, you know, just natural design principles instead of giant concrete pylons that we have here in Greenpoint. Those are things that are not necessarily in need of luxury towers to be built in order to create that. And so while I believe that the end result of Brooklyn Bridge Park in terms of its resiliency is an excellent example of how we should be doing resiliency design up here in Greenpoint, I believe the funding model for how it was created is the wrong model. And it should be part of our capital appropriations budgets and infrastructure budget.
Okay, Diana, it's your turn.
Thank you very much, Ron. This concludes this panel. We don't have time for a second round, but we do appreciate your participation. And before you leave, we just want to make sure that we take a photo, a still photo, with you smiling and waving at the camera. Lynn, take it away.
Hey, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much to Victoria, Lincoln, Benjamin, and April. Good luck. Please remember to vote June 22nd. We're just reminding the public who's joined us, those of you who have been here already, we thank you for making sure that you're doing your civic duty and participating, understanding what is the vision and plans of what are these candidates who want to represent your needs and most important issues.
We're going to go from the 33rd to the 34th district and get everybody on and run another fun survey. See who can answer these questions. What is this image? In which park was this historic image taken? McCarran, Sergeant Doherty, Continental Army, or Cooper Park? McCarran Park is incorrect. This is actually Cooper Park. And of course, Cooper Park named after famous industrialist Peter Cooper, who had his glue factory right there and a few blocks away. Okay, next question. Which street is this? Union Avenue is correct. This used to run through, the middle is an active street through McCarran Park. Mapped in 2012 by North Brooklyn Parks Alliance when it was the Open Space Alliance. And the last question, which transit themed playground is this? Ramirez Park, Marcy Green, Greengrass, Tenet Playground. Got it right, but barely. Justice Ramirez Park over in Bushwick, which is a very good segue to the 34th district and the candidates who are going to come on and answer our next round of questions. So pass it back to the moderators. Thank you.
I now ask you to join me in welcoming, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name, Luchi Gayot, Jennifer Gutierrez, Andy Marte, and Scott Murphy. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you all.
I'd like to just take a moment just to remind everyone, we have an interpreter, Jorge, who has joined us here all evening, and we want to be mindful. Your answers are being interpreted live. Please be clear and efficient with your time, as long as you're taking your time to be able to have him interpret for the public. Thank you. Ron.
Yeah. Candidates, we invite you to share your opening statements about what your parks and open space priorities would be as a council member. You have not more than 30 seconds, and the timer will help you stay on track throughout the forum. So you've got 30 seconds for these opening responses. Let's start with Luchi.
Thank you very much. Good evening, and thank you for inviting me to this forum. My name is Luchi Gayot. I am born and raised in Brooklyn from parents that are from the Caribbean. My parents' actual first job was on the corner of South 5th and Bedford at a garment factory way back in the 70s. This topic in terms of parks really hits close to home because I'm involved with a youth league that's called Phones Off, Game On. And what I have to say about the parks is, especially disadvantaged communities, is how the administrative process goes, especially when it comes to reserving space in the park. We've been waiting for 2.5 months for a permit for Bushwick Playground and also for Callahan and Kelly Playground. And I feel that it takes way too long for these processes to go through. That hurts the youth in the community. So I do want to speak about that. And I think that's connected with the budget. We don't have enough people in positions to push these type of applications through. So hopefully we get to speak about that along with a lot of other things concerning our parks today.
Let's go to Andy, Jennifer rather, I'm sorry.
Hi, thank you all so much. Jennifer Gutierrez. I'm a native New Yorker, daughter of immigrants. I think to keep this under the 30 seconds, my first project was working with Councilmember Diana Reyna for a rooftop garden at PS 84. The next project was an advocacy campaign to educate folks and inform Southside residents about BQ Green. Those are my roots. That was close to 10 years ago. That's where I'm coming from. And so I am 100% committed to the BQ Green project, to seeing that all of our playgrounds in the Southside and the rest of Williamsburg are fully funded and maintained. But just know that that's my history. That's my commitment. You can find it, it's public information, but that's where I'm coming from and those are my values. So I'm committed to both projects. Thank you.
Thank you. Andy, you're next.
So I'm gonna try to slow down a bit. I wanna thank you, Ron, and thank you, Councilwoman Reyna, for moderating this, and thanks to the organizations for putting this together. As the only candidate who actually grew up in this neighborhood, I've participated almost in every single park throughout the community. The older I've gotten, the more I've been able to appreciate the work that Councilwoman Reyna has done for this district. And I'm looking forward to spearheading some of the jobs that she started, and also just paying attention to the parks that have been ignored. The city, for some reason, you mentioned Justice Gilbert Ramirez Park has overlooked that park, and we would like to do some work there to ensure that the community can still participate there. Environmental racism is a real thing. One of my main priorities will be to stop the North Brooklyn pipeline so that we ensure that the communities surrounding there are not impacted.
Thank you, Andy. Let's go to Scott.
Thank you all for having me first and foremost. I think one of the big things we need to work on is changing the way capital projects work in our parks. I think they take far too long. They don't prioritize Black and Brown communities, excuse me. I think that having to do these big assessments and all these things, it's certainly important, but I think streamlining the process, making things work faster, and helping to maintain our parks in a more equitable manner is extremely important.
Okay, I'll turn it over to you, Diana.
Thank you, Ron. And thanks to all the candidates for being here today and giving your opening statement so we could get to know you. We would like to now ask you a very specific question that we will be asking all of you. Let's start with Luchi Gayot, and you have 75 seconds per response, which is a 5-minute total for all candidates combined. Question number 1. Parks and open spaces are often stressed for adequate and sustainable funding. While much of North Brooklyn has specific environmental justice needs, and open spaces act as key tools for mitigation, do you have specific policy proposals to secure stable investments and address the community's environmental justice legacy? If so, please explain.
Yes. I want to go back on one thing that I started on, which I think is very important. And I think we need to really focus on again is, especially inside of disadvantaged communities, the access to be able to use these facilities. I believe that's really important. And I think funding for that, I think we need to put more funding toward that. And that's one thing that I feel is a priority. The youth do not have the kind of access that they need. And I think that's really important. Now, to move on to the environment, one of the main things I think we need to look at is our transportation. Here in New York City, we produce a lot of pollution off the BQE. We produce a lot of pollution on regular streets, like how they do in Norway. They actually give you free toll if you drive an electric car. I think in New York City, we need to start adopting some of these ideas, you know, especially when it comes to the commercial vehicles. I'm a small business owner in Maspeth, and so I see a lot of commercial vehicles. And the only thing I could think of is how much would they spend on converting a lot of these vehicles if they got to have a reduced toll, you know? So we need outside of the box type of thinking to reduce pollution in this city. And this is not even a new idea. It's been tried before and it's worked in many parts of Europe. That in terms of policy and for environmental justice, that's where I would start. Hopefully this answered the majority of your question. If I miss anything, please tell me.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Scott.
So I think I can come right out and say, of course, I'll support the 1% budget for the parks. I think that's huge. I think 1% is too small. I think saying that 1% of my budget would go to parks is far too small. I was excited to see today that the council voted the Open Streets Initiative to become permanent. I think that's huge. I think overall leaning in on public-private partnership. And when I talk about that, I don't necessarily mean with things like, you know, landlords and property developers. It's things like Clean Bushwick and great organizations like that. And I think using things like participatory budgeting to fund some of those organizations. But again, I think also people who earn a tremendous amount of money in the city need to pay their fair share of taxes. And that's hugely important. And money that is collected from those taxes can be applied to the parks. And then again, I think funding in terms of the NYPD, certainly a huge amount of money goes to the NYPD. I think that we should redirect some of those funds away from things like enforcement and towards meeting the unmet needs of our neighbors, including open spaces.
Thank you very much, Scott. We'll go to Andy.
Thank you, Diana. And I want to sort of echo some of Lucci's sentiments in terms of thinking outside of the box. And there's so many opportunities in North Brooklyn. We have some of the most creative residents in this neighborhood that I'm sure would be more than happy to participate in designing the park systems. For example, the Justice Gilbert Park is one of those things that you have a cement mixing factory across the street and all the cement residue lies all over the park and there's kids playing all over it. You know, I propose sort of developing some sort of greenhouse park where there's an enclosing on the park there so that we can preserve that park. In terms of funding proposals, I echo Scott's sentiments in developing public-private partnerships that don't necessarily have to be developers. We have a large community of small businesses that have entered this neighborhood now that I'm sure would be more than happy to fund having open spaces that they would also benefit from. I just had an education conversation with some friends about the future of the education system. And the same thing applies here. COVID has sort of pushed us to be more creative and use this time now to figure out what our future looks like. And I think that the best way to do that is to organize communities and be a part of organizations and coalitions like this one to be able to put the right ideas together for that. So I appreciate your question, and I am more than happy to engage other types of ideas also.
Thank you, Andy. And last but not least, Jennifer.
Thank you. When I think about our community's history with environmental justice, I think specifically for District 34, there's a glaring aspect of our parks, but it's also just about the geography. So I think considering that reducing truck traffic is going to help in our environmental justice goals. I think the Partnership for Parks idea is a decent model. I think where there is wealth behind it, it works. We've seen it in certain wealthier neighborhoods of Manhattan. I'm sure we'll see it maybe along some waterfronts, but my concern is for the South Side. My concern is for our district, where we just don't have those characteristics. And so our council has a direct obligation to invest in our parks and invest in equity, not just equality. If every single council member has the same amount of access to capital dollars, which is 5 million, and I represent District 34, I have different needs than someone in the Upper West Side. And so those conversations need to be had. And lastly, one of the policy ideas that I have is continuing to expand the Community Parks Initiative. A couple of our parks in District 34 were able to benefit from it. The engagement process was not perfect, as we're seeing at LaGuardia Playground, where $3 million went into this playground that sits at the bottom of the BQE. But I think expanding it, doing it in earnest, and really prioritizing parks in our community, like Campis, like Gilbert Ramirez, like all of the Rodney and Marcy parks that are right at the base of the BQE. If we're not investing that for BQ Green, we should really be focusing on investing in those parks that are right above the BQ Green.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Now back to you, Ron.
Okay, I've got a two-part question to ask all of you, and it'll be the same format as before, but we'll start this one with Jennifer, go to Andy, then Scott, and then Lucci. And the question is basically a focus of El Puente's Nuestra Air campaign is LaGuardia Playground because of its proximity to the BQE and the Williamsburg Bridge, and the resulting poor air quality that has deep health impacts on that community. I would add to the air quality also the noise that comes from some of the overhead trains. The city has recently invested millions to beautify the playground, but nothing to mitigate for air quality issues. What interventions would you champion to improve community health and wellness? And in addition to that, in an effort to create more park space, the city has relied on privately owned public spaces, or what some people call POPs, in recent years. What do you think about these efforts? Do you have intentions to reduce or expand these types of spaces in North Brooklyn? How do you plan to address inequities created from decisions that have prioritized real estate interests and not people? And so I want to turn to Jennifer to address that question first.
Can you just remind me how much, do we have 75 seconds for this answer?
75 seconds.
Okay. So I'll answer your second question first about the privately owned public spaces. I think that those strategies, or that scenario, is a product of disinvestment in our communities. And so this reliance on real estate has now left it so that our communities are at a huge disadvantage, where we have to kind of utilize these partnerships to essentially ask for permission to do programming, to use this space on property and land that should be for the community. You know, I support it because, again, we are limited in resources, but do I believe that we should continue to reward real estate by saying, you know, you have an obligation to open space, but you get to do it on your own terms? Absolutely not. I don't think it's equitable. I think it's unjust, and I think it absolutely continues to make our communities vulnerable. With regards to the Nuestro Aire question and El Puente's efforts to really galvanize a community around our air quality, around noise pollution, around asthma rates. I think that there's a lot of interventions. Some of the ideas that have come directly from the youth and the members in the South Side as part of the Nuestro Aire plan are, I think, very common sense solutions, like investing in green infrastructure that will in turn invest in green jobs, investing in green walls to absorb noise and sound pollution. Again, LaGuardia Playground is not an ideal location for a playground, but it's part of our community. It's, you know, folks are rooted here. I talk to folks all the time that like love taking their kids to the kiddie playground, which is the one right across the street from El Puente. And I would never support doing away with investments to a park space, but I think a lot of the investments that I think we're hoping to champion needs to really be consulted with the community, because they have the solutions.
Andy, it's your turn.
So I just want to mention the fact that I think that there's trillions of dollars coming down from the federal government to all parts of our local governments. And so there's going to be a ton of money that correctly, and as Jennifer mentioned, it is a disinvestment issue, particularly for our community. I was here in the 90s when no one was paying attention to our neighborhoods. And Councilwoman Reyna had a very difficult job at her hands. And as I mentioned earlier, the older I get, the more I appreciate the work that she did for our community. But I would champion private-public partnerships in terms of using the spaces that aren't being utilized for open spaces, finding ways to incentivize landlords to use that land, perhaps turning them into urban farms, working with our state legislators to have tax incentives for those landlords. But again, reiterating the fact that there is a ton of money that's coming down and we should be using that. In terms of your first question about the Nuestro Aire program, I completely applaud El Puente for doing this. And it's something that we should be doing throughout District 34, as we are a large manufacturing community. But I would also press upon the fact that we have to be creative. And if that calls for making enclosed parks for some parts of our neighborhood, I think it's something that we should be looking into.
Thank you. Scott?
Yeah, thank you. I think in terms of the POPs programs, I think they need to have greater oversight from the city council. The things that I saw happening in Domino Park, for example, this summer were somewhat troubling. I think that in terms of LaGuardia Playground, we need to de-incentivize people from owning cars as much as we can by providing good alternatives in transportation, things like Revel mopeds, Lime mopeds, city bike free to every New York City resident. I think those are huge things that can help us in terms of cutting down on pollution. I think to Andy's point, incentivizing businesses in our manufacturing districts to electrify their fleets. You look at UPS, FedEx, huge fleets of gas guzzling trucks. Let's incentivize them to electrify. And there's absolutely no reason why the entire New York City fleet of vehicles should be electric vehicles, reducing their overall emissions and eliminating a lot of that pollution that is coming off of the BQE and reaching kids that are playing in these parks. Yeah.
Thank you. Lucci?
Yes, in terms of policy, and I was going to say, Scott, you literally took the words right out of my mouth. And I'll have to revisit what I was speaking about earlier in giving the incentives, and me again being in MassBeth and watching these UPS, FedEx trucks all day long. How much money do you imagine they'll save by investing in electric vehicles? One, they'll save in the diesel fuel. Two, they'll also save on tolls, just like how I mentioned earlier, they do in Norway. If you have an electric vehicle, you pay no toll. That's literally an indirect investment in our environment. Of course, you'd have to bleed it through the MTA. They own some of the tunnels in the Port Authority. But as a city government, I think we could reimagine how we reduce pollution in the city by incentivizing it. $16 to go through a tunnel. Imagine you save that money. You'll switch to electric really, really fast.
Thank you. Let's go to Diana to go with the second round of questions.
Thank you very much, Ron. This is the time when I just share with the public. Our candidates had filled out questionnaires in advance, and we want to follow up on some of their answers. You will have 75 seconds again to respond and 5 minutes in total for all candidates. Let's start with Andy. Can you tell us about any specific ideas you have for creating more open space in the district, especially the most underserved areas?
So I'm a tenant of Riseboro, which is a affordable housing nonprofit in our community. And I've always been within, and one of the issues we've had, obviously, is funding. I don't get to use my backyard. There's a ton of reasons for that. I don't get to go on my rooftop. There's a ton of reasons for that. Obviously, there's some liability issues on that. But if we can create a system where the city is investing in affordable housing nonprofits, whether that's Los Sudes, St. Nick's, or Riseboro in this district, in order to allow the tenants. Those are the most underserved tenants in our community in terms of open space. You know, NYCHA tenants have some of the most beautiful open spaces, but for some reason, the affordable housing programs have not been able to utilize their open space to the best of their ability. I believe you funded the Rhinegold Park triangle that's there, which is probably the only open space that that I know of that Riseboro has been able to utilize. But there's that we can be using so that it's more equitable resources for our tenants.
Thank you, Andy. So I'll go to Scott and ask you the same question. Can you tell us about any specific ideas you have for creating more open space in the district, especially the most underserved areas?
Yeah, I certainly think the legislation that was passed today by the City Council to make the Open Streets Initiative permanent is huge for that. I think, you know, as we're assessing our use of empty lots in the neighborhoods that have been unsold for a very long time, I think finding budget dollars to go ahead and pay market rate for those spaces and turn them into things like community gardens, parks, playgrounds, things like that, I think should be prioritized. And I think, you know, continuing when we have developers building huge towers, for example, like on Knickerbocker across from Maria Hernandez Park, they're required to build parking lots. Why shouldn't they also be required to provide some open space for residents? And Andy, I hear you. I live next door to 3 Riseboro buildings, and none of the residents in those buildings can use their backyards. You know, I think helping Riseboro to invest in some of those private open spaces for residents is huge. I'm a huge fan of Riseboro. So yeah.
Thank you.
I'll take
Ron?
that, Diana, okay? And this goes to Jennifer. According to a New Yorker for Parks assessment of Brooklyn's Community Board 1, 5% of the land is dedicated to parks and open space, as opposed to 23% citywide. CB1 ranks 53rd out of 59 in tree cover. How will you improve these numbers, especially since they reflect the inequitable support of parks and open space within the community board?
Thank you for that, Ron, and thank you for that snapshot of Community Board 1. I'm certainly aware of where our district ranks in comparison to the rest of the city. Our council district alone, which also encompasses a couple of other community boards, ranks like 47 or 48 amongst the 51 council districts in park space. So it really is a glaring issue. It really is about equity. Some of the things that I think we can do to expand on that is, I'm going to go out fully funding and implementing the BQ Green, especially in the South Side. It is a historic community of color. It is a community where we have no green space. It's blacktop playgrounds. And I think a coalition builder that understands that it's a huge undertaking that's going to take city, state, and federal support to do can help champion this project. Also, Make Meeker Move. These are ideas coming from the community. These are ideas coming from our advocates, but Make Meeker Move is a creative way to utilize this space under the BQ Green, where we're not prioritizing cars and parking, where we're prioritizing community, pedestrians, and open space. I also think today's legislation of the open streets is a really great step forward. My issue in District 34 was that there was absolutely no support for our communities. We have open streets along Humboldt that were never open. We had open streets along our side of Berry that were never utilized. And so I know that the legislation will come with some funding, but my concern will be to ensure that in communities of color, the open streets model is being fully supported and fully funded for infrastructure and not have to rely on volunteers and communities that often work more than one job. And then lastly, I think taking the example that we see in Williamsburg, the green roof at PS 84, we should be utilizing our public spaces, including NYCHA, including our public schools, to create open space, not just expand the playgrounds, but the rooftops. And these ideas have come from NYCHA residents. So these are ideas that I would amplify. Thank you.
And if everybody looks at Diana's background, you'll see how beautiful the green spaces could be if we use rooftops. Lucci, let's go to you. And apparently the folks who sent out the questionnaire never received answers. So instead, answers to their questionnaire from you. So instead, they went to your website to find information on how you would address the parks and open spaces in North Brooklyn. And in it, you talk a lot about vocational training programs and the needs of small businesses. Do you see any connections or opportunities to link these topics through improving open space?
100%, 100%. For one, a lot of people here mention new open spaces, which I believe are important. But I try to attack things also at a very basic level. And as I opened up this forum, I mentioned how it's taken us 2.5 months, and we still haven't obtained a permit to start our youth league in the Bushwick Playground. I think we need to start there in terms of helping communities, disadvantaged communities. I can imagine in other parts of town, it'll take a lot less time to be able to receive a permit. There's no reason why it should take that long. We need to invest in more programs to bring more youth leagues, more youth-centered programs into our parks, our existing parks as well. I think if we want to start helping disadvantaged communities, it's not even a huge investment. We have about 1,700 parks in this entire city, a $545 million budget that breaks down to about $320,000 per park. That's nothing in such a city, New York City, the biggest city in the world. So I think we really need to invest just a little bit more. We can invest another $1 million in a system that can give us our permit in a week rather than 2.5 months, and counting. So that's really what I would want to reimagine if we want to redesign what it is that we're doing with our parks here in the city.
In the fight for revitalizing the new Town Creek, where the nature walk was voted and recognized by a great number of the people who are here, the city refused initially to put up any open space in industrial areas. And one of the arguments that the community came up with at that point in time is that workers also deserve open space. So I just wanted to see if you had any reaction to that, Lucci.
In terms of open space in industrial areas,
workers,
yes,
they eat lunch.
Pardon me? Yeah, in terms of open space in industrial areas, was that the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of open space in industrial areas, I think we could be creative. We could be creative with it and turn this open space into something that could actually bring or attract more people into those areas. It's just a matter of how we invest, the kind of policies we put into place in order to bring more people in. Again, I was just mentioning how difficult it is for us to find a place to run our league. I mean, why don't we build a football field? Let's build a football field, and we could actually have an actual, Bushwick football league, Math Fest football league, and play inside of that field in the schools too. So there's plenty of room to innovate. There's plenty of room to reimagine and use our open spaces and use our real estate wisely here in Brooklyn.
Okay, thank you. Go to it, Diana.
Thank you, Ron. Don't get me started, Lucci. That's why BQ Green was a vision and passion of mine, because there was a war amongst little leagues and adult leagues that wanted permits for greater, greener spaces that were active. The possibilities of being able to play football or play baseball.
Yes.
So we hope to see the day.
Yes, we hope to see that day, and we definitely hope to see that day.
Thank you. With that, I just want to invite all of our candidates to wave goodbye and smile. We're going to take a still picture. Lynn, 1, 2, 3. You guys were awesome. Thank you so much. It is a brave journey you are embarking in. At this time, I just want to thank the North Brooklyn Open Space Coalition, North Brooklyn Parks Alliance, El Puente, Newtown Creek, North Brooklyn Neighbors. They have been phenomenal, dedicating hours to be able to organize what is this forum that I don't believe has ever been done, where 2 council districts come together. In unity, we have strength. And so I hope to see what is more of this to come. Ron, it has been an honor to co-moderate with you. Any final words?
To be with you, and I really want to give you a shout out for the work you did in the city council before and after you, also when you went to the borough president's office. You've been a great public servant, and it's great sharing the moderation with you. So
thank you, Ron.
Thank to all of the candidates, and the best of luck to each and every one of you.
Anthony, take it away.
Good evening, everyone. Anthony Busworth, North Brooklyn Neighbors. I hope you all learned a lot about where the candidates stand on parks and open space. And I want to thank all the candidates for joining us tonight. Best of luck on the campaign trail. You can find out more about their positions by visiting northbrooklynneighbors.org/questionnaire. Thank you to our Spanish language interpreter, Jorge Barrios, our wonderful moderators, Diana Reyna and Ron Shiffman, and the New York City Green Fund. I also want to thank our co-sponsors, which include 61 Franklin Street Community Garden, Beta NYC, Friends of Bushwick Inlet Park, Friends of Cooper Park, Greenpoint Tree Corps, Los Sudas, North Brooklyn Community Boathouse, St. Nick's Alliance, Town Square BK, and Transportation Alternatives. Early voting begins in just 44 days on Saturday, June 12th. And the primary day is Tuesday, June 22nd. Remember, this is our first time using ranked choice voting. Please visit rankthevotenyc.org to make sure you are prepared. Finally, the work of North Brooklyn Neighbors, El Puente, Newtown Creek Alliance, and North Brooklyn Parks Alliance cannot be done without the support from our community. Please visit our websites to see how you can get involved in our work. Thank you all, and good night.